Welcoming all our viewers on International Affairs, broadcasting live from Dhaka's Gulshan studio. And of course, I am going to be your host today, Shamsul Alam Pranto. And there are much more international headlines that are taking to storm, not only on the big screens, but as well as on social media. Before I begin our discussion today, let me introduce all our panelists here in the studio and across Zoom. In the studio, we have Associate Professor Rashid Alam, who of course teaches political science and comments on various international issues, and he's been on the program here as well before. And of course, we have our SATV's geopolitical correspondent, Mr. Norman Floyd Barnes from Washington, D.C. I want to begin with Mr. Norman Floyd Barnes. We know that the U.S. administration is almost nearing a successful tenure in creating a ceasefire and negotiating for peace between Ukraine and Russia. Yesterday in the evening, we found out that Ukraine is ready to go forward with the terms that the United States have presented. My question to Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes: we know that this war has gone on for 3.5 years with multiple casualties on both of the sides. And in this war, we understand that Kiev has lost out most of its strategic defenses on the eastern flank. My question to Norman Floyd Barnes: how do you see this issue unfolding, and do you think that a lasting peace is just around the corridor? Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes.
Greetings. Good morning from Washington, D.C. It appears that the peace process is progressing. President Trump is sending his special envoy and his son-in-law to the Kremlin next week to finalize and to tweak the details. Apparently, there's several small points still in discussion with Ukraine, and they largely gravitate around the issue of land, giving up how much they have to give up, how much the Russians going to have to give up, the military situation, and also NATO. It appears like the NATO part of this is going to be that they do not participate in an application or joining NATO, which, as we recall, was one of the sticking points Putin had about starting this whole conflict. So right now, it appears that there's conversations going on. There's agreements to a point, and now they have to finalize what movements are they going to proceed in the next couple of weeks. My prediction is that we will have a resolution before the ice cold winter hits in, the cold weather comes in. So we're looking at about maybe 3 weeks before we get a response on, do we move forward with the war, or do we concede and settle on land distribution?
Thanking Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes for his take on regarding this matter. I want to come back into the studio. Professor Rashid Alam, you were hearing Norman Floyd Barnes giving the perspectives of his president. Of course, U.S. President Donald Trump had signaled that a high-profile meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin, if a peace deal can be finalized between the two sides. So the United States administration understands that this peace must be arrived at long before this winter season takes place. My question to you: in recent times, Donald Trump has come out as someone who is negotiating peace between two rivals across a border, a man-marked border. This time around, it was Ukraine and Russia, and the faltering of sequence, some believe that the United States have changed their strategic alliances between Ukraine and Russia, and the point plan, that the 28-point plan, only signals that the U.S. is favoring the Russians. Meanwhile, the UK and Keir Starmer took yesterday to the House of Commons and said that the United Kingdom's support for Ukraine shall never falter. Given all of this situation, how do you understand that a lasting peace can ever be achieved between the two sides?
Thank you, distinguished guests and also dear viewers, and thanks for bringing me in the audience here. So, the Ukraine and Russian conflict is at the moment the heart of the global conflict at the moment. So we have been watching this war for 4 years, and multiple actors, multiple parties have been involved in this war, particularly the European partners, and also US is directly involved, particularly giving the John Biden administration is particularly given a huge financial packages for this Ukraine in the last 4 years. So it's good news that for the global community they can breathe and they can give a breath of relief after hearing this. But there are some uncertainties remaining, particularly what would be the European Union stakes, and the European Union has also allocated a large number of budget, a large number of financial packages for the Ukraine in the last 4 years, hoping that that will help Ukraine, the European other countries. So at the moment, like the way the peace talk is going on is good news, but I think it might be there should be some tussle, or there should be some negative influence may come out from a third parties which may not be happy or may not be totally satisfied with the outcome. So particularly I'm thinking about the European partners, the European other countries who actually gave lots of aid to the Ukraine, and if this deal taken place, there is, Ukraine cannot join in the NATO. Ukraine cannot. You have to limit their soldiers, number of soldiers they have to have in their armed forces. So those are actually, as you rightly pointed out, some of the points are actually against the Ukraine interests. So I don't know how the European partners may have react with those proposal, and they might have a hidden hand behind these to make it not happen. Sometimes it can happen as well. Yeah.
As I was hearing you talk about this issue, I picked out about the issue that European countries had stepped out earlier in a support for Zelensky and his Ukrainian government.
Right.
I want to get to Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes. I have a breaking news, ladies and gentlemen. NATO had its jets scrambled after Russian drones has entered it in its deepest incursion into Romania. This is as of recent. My question to Norman Floyd Barnes, we know that in the past we've seen NATO increasing their defense budget well over the 2% threshold to 5%, and that is going to be running until 2035 with huge implications regarding this Ukraine-Russia war. I want to understand how you felt about the United Kingdom's government and the entirety of Europe in its support for Ukraine. Do you think that when this war is over, these economies will come and aid Ukraine for a better lasting economy? Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. But my assessment is that you will see the same type of response from the UK and the EU that we've seen in the last 4 years, almost 4 years, meaning they will have a lot of conversations, a lot of talks, but no actual action. So I don't participate that all of a sudden they're going to decide to come to the physical aid of Ukraine, because they haven't. Verbally, emotionally, whatever you want to call, how you want to call it, basically they're supported on paper, but not in person. So Ukraine has to make hard decisions. Like I said, the weather is coming. They have to decide how they want to deal with this situation. Continue to fight and go down in total defeat, or make concessions on land and property they own right now, with the understanding that hopefully for several years there will be no more aggression. But as we see, Russia has an alternative plan. They will continue their aggression in and around, through the flank, left or right. They will continue this process. Right now, for them, it's just a temporary ceasefire, a staging so they can redirect. And the infrastructures of Europe should be really concerned, because most of the fuel, most of the resources come from that region. And if Russia controls it, Europe will not have these resources. So we will have another conflict going on regarding natural resources, supplies as the winter goes on. So The EU is really scrambling right now because they know that a plan is in place and it does not favor the EU.
Thanking Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes. I really love how you've broken down this war front. It's of course not a war of military weapons on the both sides, but sometimes it is a war of resources for one's or for the neighbor's better needs. I want to come into the studio once again to Professor Rashid Alam. We know that the Nord Stream pipeline, this is a gas pipeline connecting Russia to Germany of all the European regions, and earlier on before this fight had actually begun, what we saw is that the pipeline has been blown up. And of course, the leadership back then was headed by Joe Biden. And multiple sources online as well as video sources claim that blowing up this pipeline was the catalyst that involved Russia to attack Ukraine. Some people say that it was the United States that had taken part in this covert operation. Some people suggest that it was Ukraine so that they could start this fight with Russia. I want to understand, as Norman Floyd Barnes was saying, resources have become so important, so hard to find, and of course hard to deliver amongst the masses. My question to you, we know that the winter has approached already into the European season. I'm sure you have also visited United Kingdom a couple of weeks back. I want to understand how you see this war. It's not just a war of weaponry or a war of might. It sometimes is certainly a war of resource sharing. So I want to get your view, because you are someone who teaches political science.
So you actually pointed out the right thing. Actually, it's not about the war machine and machineries. It's about the people, and globally the people have suffered a lot. Particularly the European countries, their inflation is in double digit for a long time. And I have been there like since 2018 to 2023, and I have been seeing how the inflation was tremendously increased because of this Ukraine war, particularly the energy security, like the energy prices, the electricity prices, even the natural gas prices has been tremendously increased because of this, the cheap supply of, you said, the scarce resources that are very valuable for the people, and if you supply those resources within the affordability, then it ensured the energy security. But at the moment, like you said, Nord Stream in Germany and other cheap flow of the natural resources has been curtailed because of this Ukraine-Russia war, and I don't know whether USA has an interest in that regards, because particularly after the Russian gas has stopped to flow in Europe, it is the US gas which has been supplied in these European countries with the higher prices. But ultimately, as you said, the people who has to pay this amount, it's not the government, but ultimately it has been shouldered upward by the people around the European countries, and the harsh season is coming at the moment. So Ukrainian population have been suffering for 4 years, and the European Union people particularly, they have been paying the prices of the war by higher inflation rates and lack of availability of those cheap available resources, which would be very useful for the people who have been struggling with the income, because the real income, real wages haven't been increased for a long time in the European countries. So I think these are the issues that the mass people have been suffered, and the government of these countries should have considered that they should immediately broker the deal, and for the peace talk that should be reinstated soon. Yeah.
Of course, I understand that is important. I want to give an update which is also regarding this Ukraine-Russia issue. There has been a country in the Caucasus, namely known as Turkey, as of recent. Its leader, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, had joined a virtual meeting of this coalition of the willing over Ukraine. Of course, the coalition of the willing is a grouping of the European nations along with Istanbul. And as we know, Ankara had hosted the 2 times the 2 sides, the Ukraine and Russia, in understanding a prisoner swap between this war. Of course, Turkey is now taking the entire world stage to understand and to broker deals between 2 neighbors or 2 enemies, so the betterment of these war fronts can stop. My question goes to Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes in Washington, D.C. As I was saying, the position of Turkey and its leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan, someone who has been taking to storm and who has been constantly influencing the fact that the 2 sides must stop this war for the betterment of its people. My question to Norman Floyd Barnes, how do you see Turkey's resilience and the recent Turkish steps to mediate for war efforts? How do you understand this progress?
Thank you again for that question. Turkey itself is dependent on this conflict being stabilized. Again, we're talking about resources. We're talking about energy. We're talking about infrastructure. We talk about trade. We're talking about the movement of commerce globally. Turkey benefits from a agreement with the EU and Russia, meaning basically Turkey is also a country that's dependent on oil and other resources. They do not have natural resources like most countries to sustain itself. So they are depending on the movement of transports of trade and commerce, energy, power, all of these things going on. As we mentioned, winter is coming along, so they depended a lot on resources. And if these countries cannot come to a term, they will have to spend the money that they have designed for resources on defense. So what we're seeing is the drone attack is more of a psychological attack to basically divert you from whatever you want to do in terms of funding, spending money, tariffs, spending money on resources. So the only option they have is basically we have to defend ourselves. We have to be ready, but that costs money. That money is coming from the money we need to buy resources. So that leaves them in a situation. What do we do? Well, we have to get the resources that we can afford. And right now, Russia has that.
Thank you, Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes, for your comment regarding Turkey's stance between Ukraine and Russia. There is an issue that I want to bring out to Professor Rashid Alam before we head into a break. Although minute, it does have implications for Bangladesh as well. You know, Bengalis often try to immigrate to other countries, and most of these countries do include Cyprus being the transition hub into the United Kingdom. Some of the instances that we've seen that the Russian war military plan out was in such a way that few Bengalis saw themselves, instead of being migrated into a better opportunity elsewhere, they were pushed into this war to fight for Russia.
Yeah.
Of course, there are language barriers, there are so many understanding barriers, and there have been loss of life as far as I know. But the war does seem to be coming to an end, and there is instead huge opportunity cost. One of them being Ukraine losing out almost 20 to 30% of its land on its eastern flank. That, of course, includes the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. So, of course, this has huge implications for the energy stability of Ukraine. In general, I want you to answer regarding the fact that there are Bengalis who fought for the Russians, and not only Bengalis, there was also North Koreans who fought. I want to understand how you see this matter, that foreigners are also taking part in this war.
Yeah, no, we are in a modern world where mercenaries, like these are called mercenaries.
Yes.
Or soldier force. They have been
Contracted.
Contracted for the war. So Russia initially they lost some of their soldiers and their forces, so they actually reinstituted through the supply from a good number of Bangladeshis have been going to work work as a work soldier in the Russian, and also you say the North Koreans. So it's actually the cooperation, actually, like the North Korea has a support for the Russia, and they have a good allies with the Iran, Russia, those countries. So
Venezuela as well.
Venezuela as well. So so Russia, they seek the support from those countries, and also for Bangladeshis, like there is lots of Bangladeshis who are very aspirant to migrate through crossing the irregular border, like the sea border with the European. So they have been lost their life for this dangerous sea route journey to enter Europe. So for them, I think it's better opportunities. Like, although it's risky to work as a soldier in the front of the border. So I think that's extraordinary issues. Like I have seen it never before, but that's what defines the war industry, war issues in the modern war. That's how you bring a soldier from the mercenaries, you contract it out. So that's how Russia has been consolidated its front by missing those gaps through bringing out them.
An accurate observation for Professor Rashid Alam. Ladies and gentlemen, Production team has instructed me that we should go for a break, but after the break there are huge headlines that I wish to discuss. Do stay with us as we head for a commercial break.
Hotel, Zinda Bazar, Sylhet. Local and international cuisines. Exclusive banquet hall for all events. 5-star luxurious rooms and suites with bulletproof glass. Fiberglass swimming pool. Relaxing spa. Well-equipped gym. Experience panoramic beauty at SATV restaurant. Welcome to Grand Palace Hotel. Grand Palace Hotel and Resorts, Jollar Par, Zinda Bazar, Sylhet, Bangladesh.
বাংলাদেশে দীর্ঘ ৩৭ বছরের সাফল্যের অগ্রযাত্রায় এসএ পরিবহন।
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to International Affairs. Today I am joined by Professor Rashid Alam of Dhaka University, who of course teaches political science, and he's joining me in the studio, while we have Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes, who is of course our geopolitical correspondent from Washington DC. I want to begin with Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes. Very recently we've seen a new Prime Minister, a female Prime Minister leading the nation of Japan. And her comments has made Beijing, the CCP leader Xi Jinping, very worried. And of course, there have been a huge economic fallout between the two nations, with over 500,000 tourists that have cancelled their flights between the two. I want to understand Norman Floyd Barnes' position on this outcoming or incoming war front. I understand that is the war is over Taiwan. The sovereignty of Taiwan is being questioned nonetheless. The two sides, the United States and of course China, had met earlier in South Korea, but Japan, as an ally of the United States, is now in a retaliatory mode between Xi Jinping's China. I want to understand how Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes feel about this issue. Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes.
Yeah, thank you again. The sudden empowerment of Japan through the new Prime Minister can be contributed to the relationship, the new developed relationship with the United States. Recently the United States met over in South Korea, and it talks to us about how the U.S. can position itself in that region, and the United States is now forming a stronger alliance with Japan. The conversation is about resources. The resources are in Taiwan. So what's happening is basically the U.S. has made unofficial commitments to Japan and the South Korean region to provide support, resources, what's necessary to make sure that Taiwan does not fall into the total control of China. So her emboldened comments and approach is based on having a strong ally from the United States to support what they do, and they have reassurances that we will provide resources and support to anything to stabilize the region and make sure Taiwan does not fall in the hands of China.
Of course, that was a wonderful observation regarding this issue. I want to get to our viewers and give some information regarding the tensions between Japan and China. Japan has dismissed a letter, a Chinese letter to the United Nations, accusing Tokyo of threatening armed intervention over Taiwan as inconsistent with the facts, and is of course substantiated. These were the words that Japan has used as China had written a letter to the UN regarding this recent offensive. I want to come to the studio with Professor Rashid Alam. This is a very new time. I'm sure that there has been historical indifferences and differences between the two sides. There was a time way before in the world wars that we've seen Japan to be a conquering nation. They have conquered some parts of China. They had conquered Singapore, as far as I know. This is history.
Right.
But I want to come to modern day Japan. Someone who has been more or less a pacifist nation ever since World War II is suddenly now taking a stance, a defense military stance against China. And of course, the South China Sea is named after these waters. These international waters is where Taiwan resides. I want to understand how you felt about it, given that China had taken this matter to the United Nations.
Thank you. So after the Second World War, Japan has actually redirected its interest to the economic development. So they achieved immense economic prosperity in the post-World War period, and Japan's haven't invested that much for their security matters, so security issues like their defense forces or other thing, and that has been actually the treaty they had with the USA. So that treaty has supposed to be expired. I mean, yeah, just few years back, and that's how Japan now want to see it's like a new role and reshaping its role, probably little bit of military independence they wanted to achieve. I think the recent talks about the Taiwan issues by the Japanese new premier, I think it is little bit unnecessary. I don't know whether the international audience, how they're gonna felt about it, but I think the conflict, although Taiwan issues is it's still contracted conflict, but it is little bit of a compromise between the countries, and although China has reservation if any country want to normalize relation with the Taiwan, but it is little bit of settled issues. I think the remarks from the Japanese Prime Minister and also the other officials, I think has been created much more tension on the issues at the moment, and it might create that what you said, the new areas of conflict in the Asian borders. So I think for me it's quite a bit unnecessary. I think the way Japan directed the global economy by its immense economic prosperity and development, Japan should be considered focusing on that, and rather than militarily involved in the global affairs, I would expect Japan should continue doing its its role as a global peace forces, and also it has contributed immensely in UN peacekeeping efforts and other international cooperation. Japan is also one of the biggest bilateral development partners of Bangladesh as well.
Of course.
So we have also, if Japan involves in this kind of military affairs, then the flow to the global development budget gonna be reduced as well. So we can see it has an implication for us as a country as well. So we want to see Japan more active, proactive in terms of peace missions and also global economic stability, cooperation, and mutual development, rather than involved in militarily.
Thank you, Professor Rashid Alam. But this story is not just between Japan and China. As we know that the People's Liberation Navy is the largest naval fleet in the entire world as of today. And there has been numerous times how China has, or the People's Navy has been doing reconnaissance in the South China Sea. This still remains an very disputed issue between nations such as Vietnam, nations such as Indonesia, and those who share these international waters. And of course, sovereignty of these international waters are more or less been broken by China. And today we see one of these nations, Japan, breaking stance and saying, we will take you on if that be so militarily. I want to come to Norman Floyd Burns. As you were hearing Professor Rashid Alam, that it is not just the issues that pertain between Japan and China. This is also a larger implication of Chinese developments inside various islands in the South China Sea. I want to understand how Mr. Norman Floyd Burns feel about this, especially as this matter still remains very disputed. Mr. Norman Floyd Burns.
Yes, thank you. First, we'll understand China. China global mission is to build, and they do it through infrastructure developments in underdeveloped parts of the world. The naval increase and the naval presence is designed to protect their interests. So they have to have a naval fleet that can get to these areas that we are currently engaged in. They have countries that are developing and they need to have resources to respond and protect their investment. China plan is to basically to influence and to serve as an alternative to the Western option in terms of trade, commerce, and development. So their whole program is based on having a presence in parts of the world and having an impact and having resources from these areas to sustain itself and also to develop as the global leader in terms of dealing with what necessary in the world, which is a contradiction to what the Western influence want to do. The United States and other parts of the Western world, they want to stay close in the region, have strategic location, and the military is only being used on both sides as a deterrent and let people know that we have a presence there. The intentions of getting into an all-out engagement, assessment is very minimal. We were about to see the Cold War get colder.
That was a stout ending to what you had said, a Cold War to get colder. There's another question I want to ask Ambassador Norman Floyd Burns in Washington, D.C. There is a significant updates regarding the Venezuela and the U.S. conflict. I would want to call it a conflict as multiple boats have been destroyed and blown up by the U.S. military. And of course, the United States is reportedly preparing to launch a new phase of operations targeting Venezuela as a broader part of pressure campaign on the government of Nicolas Maduro. And usually this had started with illicit drug trafficking into the United States, which is of course a problem in the United States. And of course, someone in the Latin America, Venezuela, has been capitalizing on this issue. And this is how the United States administration sees this as. But the campaign has, of course, given international remarks such as the United States is breaking international law by targeting these boats and, of course, not having a trial or not putting them to the word of the law. I want to understand how Ambassador Norman Floyd Burns feel about this. I'm sure that you have been reading upon this issue as this is so close to the boundary in your part of the world.
Yes, again, this is a topic actually I've been in conversations with some of my colleagues in the region, and the motive is for the United States is to have a presence in that region, particularly Venezuela. The situation around the boats being destroyed, one observation, and I did a little research on it. What was the final destination of these boats that were supposed to be heading towards the United States? Well, I guess let me enlighten you that the destination for these drug boats is Europe, not the United States. So if you notice that these attacks was close to Venezuela, not in the open sea, and so if you wait a little longer, you'll see that the boats will be not moving towards the United States, but more towards Europe. So the concept of protecting the United States from drugs is somewhat exacerbated. The motive is to basically use that as a premise to go in and attack a crime drug ridding haven in Venezuela, ran by the current administration down there, which has been designated as a terrorist group. So basically what you're seeing now is the attempt for the the Trump administration is to have foot and boots on the ground and influence and impact in an oil-rich country, Venezuela.
Thanking Ambassador Norman Floyd Burns. I understand there is some time restrictions, hence I will ask you one last question before we move on with the topics. I know that the international reaction has been very wide regarding these attacks on these drug boats. The allies of Venezuela like Cuba and Iran has condemned the US actions, framing them as imperialist and warning of dire consequences not only for this administration but administrations to come. I want your last remarking comments regarding this international reactions to the attack on the boats. Ambassador Norman Ford Barnes.
6 Democrat leaders also condemn the issue.
Yes.
Yes, the international, well, actually, the global opinion is that these attacks are unnecessary, very provocative, and illegal on international law. There's no precedence for it. As I mentioned before, the destination is not the United States. It's other places, and this is being used as a premise to get into the region, a reason to do that. So the international world is strongly condemning this. The courts has ruled that this is a legal act, but it still goes on until it does not happen. So we're waiting to see exactly how the court's going to rule, how this thing is going to play out, and what the international court decide to do. Right now, it's a piracy type of situation.
I want to personally thank Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes for his summary of how he sees this Venezuela and US conflict. But I want to come back to the studio with Professor Rashid Alam. I know that some of the leaders in the Democratic Party, as you were saying, they have condemned these strikes on these boats. I want to understand how you felt about it, given that you have immense knowledge regarding political science. We know US is trying to stop wars. One of those examples is Ukraine and Russia.
Right.
But here it is trying to cause a war in its own neighborhood. I want to understand how you felt before we can go on a break.
Thank you. So I think the 6 Democratic senators who spoken for the truth, actually, they who spoken for the justice. Like, you know, you cannot, with the suspicion, you cannot directly shoot out this board. This could be civilian board. This could be used for other purposes. So the way, and the 6 Democratic leader actually are calling their soldiers. You are not, you are not bound to take those illegal orders given by the U.S. Administration. So if you feel so that's how the political retribution issue. Now FBI is charging them. FBI is, thinking of like why they are making this statement. But they actually made this statement from the point of global peace and justice. I mean, you cannot, in international waterways, you cannot directly shoot other civilian boats with the suspicion of they can be narcotics or other things. So that's why there are the 6 Democratic the leaders who has been spoken for the from the neutral viewpoint that you should not they call for their soldiers. You are not bound to shoot those if you deem it illegal or if you deem it not a right one. So that's how they have been taken into the FBI's investigation. So I think it actually the way Trump administration taken the decision about charging those 6 Democratic leaders is an act of political retributions, which is not expected again, and it's a huge blow for the democracy. Like you had to accept this criticism point, that you have to accept those neutral viewpoint from your senators who has been calling for from the point of view of justice and from the point of view of international deed and agreement and international established principles. So you have to accept that rather you taken the action of political retribution by charging and investigating through the FBI. I think Norman Floyd also gonna be agree with that. Yeah,
of course, and I understand that if it were to be blown up, there's no reason to find out whether or not there were actually illicit drugs on those boats.
No, yeah.
And of course, everyone has a right to a trial.
Right.
If not, this is quite so important. And of course, I will definitely talk about this more on. But ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at the last segment of the program. But before we talk about more on these issues, we need to go for a commercial break.
সার্ভিস এখন আধুনিক ও শৈল্পিক স্থাপত্য শিল্পের দেশ মালয়েশিয়ার কুয়ালালামপুরে। লাখো গ্রাহকদের প্রয়োজনের দিক লক্ষ্য রেখে নিশ্চিত বিশ্বস্ততা ও আন্তর্জাতিক মানের সেবা এখন ডোর টু ডোর। এসএ পরিবহন কুরিয়ার অ্যান্ড পার্সেল সার্ভিস SDN BHT 120 Jalanthon HS Lee 50050 কুয়ালালামপুর, মালয়েশিয়া। এসএ পরিবহন পার্সেল অ্যান্ড কুরিয়ার সার্ভিস, আপনার সেবায় সবসময়।
Explore the magnificent view of Rangpur. 5-star facilities, rich chain hotel, Grand Palace.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to International Affairs Broadcasting live from Dhaka's Gulshan studio. Of course, in the studio we have Professor Rashid Alam, while we had Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes joining us from Washington, D.C. We were talking about Venezuela and the United States. However, I want to come back to China and in its entire dominion, as we were saying, how Chinese influence on the South China Sea has all the other nations, sovereign nations, being very irky about this issue. And there is an issue that is very close to heart over here in Bangladesh as well. We know that the chicken's neck is what separates that region, as Indians call it, Arunachal Pradesh, while the Chinese side has given names of all of these territories in its own regard. I want your comment, because this is so close to home and it definitely has some kind of implication for Bangladesh as well.
Of course. I think these are the settled issues, but now it's actually not settled. It seems like that way. I think the Chinese naming of those some of the territories, and earlier we had seen that Nepal's did some of these exercises earlier, actually their border areas with the Indian borders. So this is how you can conflict escalates through this process. I think China's dominion in this, the way Chinese, I can see this is like a maximizing pressure with the Indian administration, like that they have lots of some of the unsettled issues in border areas, and I can see this is a part of wider geopolitical context rather than this only the bilateral conflict between China and India. I can see it's a wider geopolitical maximizing the pressure that China is doing at the moment, and also China is now currently triggering a ceasefire agreement between Myanmar Junta Army and also Malaysian Democratic Military Alliance, which is China's now. The Myanmar issues, the instability in the Myanmar, which actually displaced more than 1 million of.
And there Myanmar is going into an election.
Soon. In December and January. Yes. So, which is, I think China want to see is like a more geopolitical leader in this South and Southeast Asian countries, and that's how it's actually maximized by its pressure on the Indian administration, which has been allied with the USA for a long time. So this is like a political provocative species to maximize your pressure and consolidate your position in the geopolitical leaders in this region. I want to see this the verbal exchanges through this way only, but I think it will not turn into a protracted or a direct escalation of the conflict through this way.
Thanking you once again. But I understand that in recent days there has been both friendship and alliance, as well as hostilities and deterrence. These are the terms I will use to define the relationship between one of our neighbors with the Chinese, the India and the Chinese conflict that has happened. They have fought on the borders. They have had physical fights around the border, and they do have territorial disputes, as we were talking about.
And they are part of BRICS.
Of course, they are also part of a global community as well. So their indifferences is what is causing these tensions, which of course is happening near and around Bangladesh. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to come to a topic that we still do not have enough awareness about. I am of course talking about climate change. Let me give you the headline from the BBC from UK. Once in 300 years, rain hits Thai city as floods ravage Southeast Asia. This is November the 26th, and today we find that floods have ravaged these parts of Thailand as well as Vietnam and Malaysia. These floods, which have killed at least 33 people, has prompted the authorities to deploy military ships and helicopters to support relief efforts. Of course, the heaviest rainfall in 300 years was almost 335 millimeter in a single day. This has caused people to be disconnected. Of course, power lines and the entire situation inside southern Thailand is very drastic at this moment. I understand that it's not just Bangladesh that is affected by changes of climate. Today, it is also Thailand. I want to come to Professor Rashid Alam. I know that you teach political science, but you definitely know about the environment, about the climate change that takes place. I want you to give me your take as I read out the article regarding climate change.
Yeah, so that's what we call erratic rainfall. I mean, tremendous amount of rainfall within a shorter amount of time, which nature cannot absorb. The system, the water system, the river system cannot absorb, which is unprecedented in the recent years. You can see the cloud burst in Pakistan. You can see a massive cloud burst in India as well, which caused heavy rainfall in the hilly region and caused devastating impact for the Pakistan, in India, and you say in the Thailand, in Vietnam. So that is how we can see the climate change is manifested. It's a reality. It's not a matter of joke, or it's only limited within the science book. It's a reality that the communities in this country is already facing. So I think this month we had the COP30 event in the global scale. We are sorry to hear that there is no right guideline has been, or agreement has been reached regarding to how to phase out the fossil fuel use, or how to go forward internationally bounded principles to reduce the global emission of carbon and also mitigate the increased global warming. So that's how, like, the due to massive global warming effect, we are heading to a 2-degree Celsius increase by the end of the century. So that's how they wanted to limiting it, and that's why the Paris Agreement is one of the tremendous agreement that COP had achieved in the past. But unfortunately, the USA and some of the major countries who then withdrew themselves from this agreement, and that's how we are now in a complete shamble. I mean, we're not progressing since Paris Agreement in terms of internationally agreed principles to reduce the emission, to reduce this massive global warming, and that effect has been already manifested in different parts, as you said, in the Southeast Asia, like the Vietnam, Thailand, they are suffering. And this year, we also seen massive rainfall in Dhaka as well, particularly, early rainy season we had in Dhaka, we had in other South Asian countries. So it's a big reality, and for the low-lying countries like Bangladesh, it's a massive challenges. Particularly, you can see last year we had an unprecedented flood in the zone Feni,
last August.
Feni, Noakhali. That is also because of the immense number of erratic rainfall in the hilly areas in part of India. So that's how I can see it's a massive life security threatening for the global people, particularly for the people with the coastal lines, coastal countries, and also low-lying areas. So global community had to accept this is a reality, and channeling resources like in the COP30 we had an expectation that $1.3 trillion of grant should be channeled to these climatically vulnerable countries, so that they can build maximum amount of resilience. We need lots of money to cope with this kind of unprecedented
and they're understanding the international effort for an international fund that would address these issues for countries that are most affected.
We need to prepare for ourselves for this kind of unprecedented flood. You know, when flood happened in last year in Feni, we had nothing to do because the amount of rainfall
was no
so
government.
Huge.
The interim government was only in its first 30 days.
Have not had the capacity to actually deal with this unprecedented flood and also a natural call. So we had to prepare ourselves, but that's not enough. We had to reduce our global emission of carbon and reduce the global warming. Otherwise, the global communities, the life of the mankind is very much in threat in the upcoming days.
And a start observation by Professor Rashid Alam. I want to give an example of climate change, and not only that has taken to Thailand, Malaysia and Vietnam, these countries that are being affected in Southeast Asia. But as of recent, there is an example coming out of Ethiopia. A 10,000-year-old dormant volcano had suddenly started spewing ash 8 to 9 miles into the air. Satellite imagery had shown that it had traveled from Ethiopia all the way into the Indian airfields, and what the implications of such an event caused Air India and various other airlines in Ethiopia to have airlines go shut down. So every year, climate heads have always said that this year has been the hottest year on record.
Right.
I'm sure next year they will also repeat these same lines. But people's understanding that it's not really an important subject. U.S. President Donald Trump thinks climate change is a hoax. He has arrived at a point of his life where he does not see the need for a
Right.
clean oxygen for the future generations.
Right, right.
Before we come to the close, I want to understand what is your final takes regarding climate change. I know Bangladesh has been affected, and even modern developed economies such as Malaysia and Thailand, even they aren't spared from the
Right.
changes of climate change.
I think we need more responsible global leaders to combat this unprecedented crisis we are facing from the climatic risk in globally. It's not only any particular region, it's not any particular countries, but it's a global risk, and you have to deal these issues through global actions, and the countries has to have their mutually agreed plans to how they're going to reduce their climate emissions, the carbon emissions. So since international, we do not have any, we have Paris Agreement, but that US, as you said, USA withdrew themselves. Donald Trump is not very much, he is very anti-climate change provocative speeches. We have seen lots of times. So I think at the moment to combat with this imminent threat that we are facing from the climatic changes, we need some global responsible leaders who are going to take us to a life security, climate security, and energy security. How we want to have a foresight what gonna come in the next years, what gonna come in the next 10 years. So unprecedented number of displacement we have facing in Bangladesh at the moment because of this riverbank erosion, because of the flooding, and because of those all other cyclones even. So not only Bangladesh, like other countries, like in Maldives is also very low-lying countries, and also countries in some of the Caribbean countries as well. So they're having tremendous risk because of the sea level rise and global warming. So
Right.
we need some global leadership and also UN leadership to take us into a world with less number of carbon emission, and as a responsible action to combat this global warming. Yeah, that's how we.
Thank you so much, Professor Rashid Alam, for your take. I want to have one last question, but the prospects is definitely regarding Bangladesh. I want to understand how you felt about the coming days for Bangladesh's future, especially as we have this climate issue going on. I want to last final takes before I can end the show.
Yeah, so Bangladesh has taken leadership in many aspects in terms of these climate talks, particularly the negotiation with the global north countries who are the biggest emitters. So Bangladesh has to, even international areas, they have to negotiate with those are the biggest emitters, but also in the domestically, the country has to take accountable for its own action, like the way we're dealing with our river, the way we are dealing with the waterways, the way we're dealing with the pollution. So we have also lots of internal issues, and that also heavily threaten our life, the people within the countries as well. So Bangladesh has to invest a lot of amount of its budget in the future days for how do we get fresh water, how do we get our river and waterways being recovered, and also how to curb down the pollution level of the air pollution. We are globally second or third in terms of air pollution. So we have to also taken care of our own action as well, not only negotiate with the international, the biggest emitters, but you have to be very responsible. The way you see your development, the way you see your own environment, and the way you see risking your own life, own people's lives. So I think Bangladesh have to taken lots of consideration. At the moment, the environmental advisor, who is a very sensible person, I think the future government who are going to take into the power in the next election, they have a biggest amount of budget for this kind of environmental resilience activities. We also have to have lots of budget for like the disaster capacity, like the,
yes.
If a massive earthquake is coming, we do not have the capacity to face that. So I think the fire service and civil defense, we have a maximum amount of budget in the next few years so that we can deal with this issue. Otherwise, there will be massive humanitarian crisis we will be facing in Bangladesh in the next few years, I think. Yeah.
A wonderful observation regarding the current situation in Bangladesh, and of course how climate change has ravaged parts of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to once again thank Professor Rashid Alam for his valuable insights and contributions on this program, as well as Norman Floyd Barnes, who had joined us from Washington, D.C. As I draw closer, today is, of course, the 26th of November. It's known as Constitution Day at our neighboring country, India. And, of course, tomorrow will be celebrated as Thanksgiving in the United States, a day of peace and family harmony between the communities inside the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in on International Affairs. I shall see you all tomorrow.